Hey you guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel, Peterisms, where I tell stories of my life and just little things that I've learned as I've grown into the person that I am today. And we have a special guest with us today, Mr. Boo Radley. Hey, Mr. Boo Radley. He has been running up and down the stairs. He is being crazy today. He's having a crazy day. And now he's like, I think I'm just going to relax for a little bit. I'm going to relax and listen to my dad talk. So, I was reading through the comments from my video that I posted yesterday, and the questions are starting to roll in. I think I only got like 12 comments on my video yesterday, but I got several questions on there. So, I was trying to pick like which question I wanted to address, and I got this question on there, and it was something, to be honest with you, that like I talk a lot about kind of indirectly, but I have never really like thought about directly, if that makes sense. Let me read the question to you, because I thought it was a good question for a topic for discussion. The question says, how can you watch or see the behavior of a sick parent with alcohol? Why do some of the kids that suffered with a using parent pick up the drink? Help me. Seeing it in my life as a kid was really scary. I think it's a fantastic question. I really, really do. And, you know, it's interesting to me because when I was growing up, well, first of all, to address how do kids watch that, right? I don't know that I had any other option, if you want to know the truth. You know, there's a lot of argument over whether or not addiction is a disease. Okay, I 100% believe that addiction is a disease. It is defined by the American Medical Association as a disease. So when people say addiction isn't a disease, you shouldn't compare it to this, you shouldn't compare it to that, blah, 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 whatever. Well, a lot of diseases aren't comparable, okay? But it is defined by the American Medical Association as a disease, okay? It has, you know, identifiable signs and symptoms, you know, it's fatal if it's not treated, things like that. So when people want to get in that argument with me, the first thing I always say to them is, take it up with the American Medical Association. Don't take it up with me, okay? This isn't an opinion. If you Google search, is addiction a disease per the American Medical Association, it will come up, okay? It's like telling somebody that diabetes isn't a disease. I mean, it's defined by the American... I don't know what else to tell people when they want to get in that argument with me. To be honest with you, I'm not going to get in an argument with people about that because it's not the, you know, the ground that I'm going to die on, so to speak, right? Like, for me, I know it's a disease. I can see that it's a disease in myself and other people around me, including my mother. And not only that, by how it is defined by the American Medical Association, but not only that, and I know this is a polarizing view, okay? But it's not an opinion. I mean, it's a fact, right? Like, this is the American Medical Association, you know? So there's a lot of other things that we go to for the American Medical Association for fact. But when it comes to addiction, people are like, how dare you compare it to this? How dare, it's a choice, blah, 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 whatever, okay? So it is a choice whether or not, you know, like I choose to pick up. Those things are choices, right? It is a choice, but when you look, that's part of the treatment, okay, of addiction. That's not really about the disease of addiction, okay, the picking up. When people want to say, how dare you say it to this person? Well, the only way I can compare it to you, okay, is when people say, well, how dare you compare it to something like diabetes? I'm not comparing it as a clear example to diabetes, but what it would be like, right, is if you had somebody that had serious diabetes and they chose not to go to a doctor, they chose not to take care of their diabetes. I mean, I know friends of mine that have diabetes and, you know, their sugar's all over the place and they, you know, would be like, well, I wasn't really watching it for the last couple of days, or I ate things I shouldn't eat and things like that, right? And so they weren't following their doctor's orders, they weren't taking their insulin if they have to take insulin, things like that. I mean, I have friends of mine that are like on the pump and all that kind of stuff, right? That is similar to, okay, we wouldn't say to somebody that wasn't going to see a doctor for diabetes that they didn't have diabetes and diabetes wasn't a disease. We wouldn't say that, first of all, right? What we would say is they're not listening to the treatment options that are provided to them. Okay, similarly with addiction, okay, it's not about fighting whether or not addiction is a disease. What it's fighting is that those people are not taking the treatment options that are provided to them. And one of those is don't pick up, okay? Those are things that if you went to your doctor and your doctor defines you as chemically dependent, your doctor would say to you, don't use, be abstinent, okay? And then do this, do that, whatever, blah, 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 right? So when people say that it's not comparable to this because people have the choice of whether or not they want to pick up, people don't have a choice whether or not they have a disease. People don't have a choice whether or not they have the disease of addiction, okay? That's been proven by the American Medical Association. People do have a choice whether or not they pick up. People do have a choice whether or not they take drugs or whatever, or drink or whatever, okay? People do have choices on whether they go to therapy, okay? People do not have a choice whether or not they have diabetes. People do have a choice whether or not they take care of themselves from a health point of view, or whether they see a doctor and they follow the doctor's instructions, okay? We're talking about the definition between, or the difference between the definition of a disease, okay, and addiction, and whatever that other disease is, and the treatment. We're not comparing that, okay? And to be honest with you, when people say things to me like, you comparing, or you saying that addiction is a disease, how can you possibly say that when people that have cancer, they didn't choose to have cancer? I didn't choose to be an addict, okay? And I don't really know how else to explain that to you. When I was 4 years old, it wasn't my dream to grow up and smoke crack. It just wasn't, okay? So I'm very unclear as to how, like, that is such a shaming attitude. You know, I have so many friends of mine that have been diagnosed with several different types of cancer. I have several friends of mine that have passed. One of my very close friends, you know, passed after being on, you know, different kinds of treatments for 7 years, you know, had a double mastectomy, passed away from breast cancer years ago. I shared about it on my videos. I have never once compared addiction to cancer. I would never do that, okay? I don't even think it's a fair comparison at all whatsoever of what people that have cancer go through, okay? But then that attitude of that, when people want to say, well, you're comparing, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that by the American Medical Association, addiction is a disease. That's what I believe. That's what I've been told. That's what I've been taught by reading the facts, okay? And so when people say that, it's kind of, to the addict or the alcoholic, well, to me, I'll tell you how I feel it. When people say that, it feels kind of like, well, you chose your disease. These people can't. I did not choose my disease. I did not choose to be an addict or an alcoholic. I chose to pick up. Okay? And after I knew that I was an alcoholic or an addict, and I continued to choose to pick up, I totally own that 100%. That's on me. Okay? People with cancer cannot do anything about having cancer. I understand that. They can choose to go with treatment options or refuse treatment options. Okay? But they cannot do anything about having cancer. I'm not even comparing the severity of it. Okay? But when you look at things of how many people are dying from addiction and things like that, it is very serious. So whenever I read comments like that, I'm always kind of like, here again, somebody is shaming the alcoholic or the addict, right? It's not a comparison study, okay, of what is the worst disease. I've never said that addiction is the worst disease. But by the American Medical Association, you can Google it, you can look it up, it is defined as a disease. The reason I'm talking about this is because when I was growing up, the way that I related to my mother's alcoholism was very much like she had a disease. And I didn't even have that knowledge yet, okay? My fear was that it wasn't even being like angry at my mom or mad, even though I think that happened more like when I was in high school. When I was a child with it, okay, and I'm talking elementary and junior high, I was scared. I was scared that my mom was going to die. I would come home, you know, at a friend's house or whatever. I've shared stories where I couldn't get into the house or whatever. I was, you know, downstairs. My mom would pass out in bed, and I would, like, try to wake her up because I didn't know if she was dead or if she was asleep. I was terrified, okay? I was scared that my mom was going to die from alcohol. That was the truth. I would be at my dad's house on weekends, and I would call my mom just to say hi, and she'd be completely obliterated drunk, right? I wasn't angry. I wasn't mad. I was 6, all right? I was scared to death that my mom was going to fall. I mean, my mom had a friend of hers that, from like way back in the day, these people, it's easily Google search, but anyway, these people were insanely wealthy, had famous friends and whatever, and my family knew their family. And he had like fallen drunk, and like one of their friends that was a celebrity, a famous person, one of this people's friends had fallen drunk and hit their head on an end table and died. I can remember my mom saying that story from a very young age. And, like, because they were all sitting around talking about it. This woman was talking about it, how her dad was friends with this guy. They used to go on, like, safaris together and stuff like that. And I can remember hearing that story because it was so glamorous to me. There was a part of the drinking that was glamorous to me. And so they would all sit around and drink, and they would share these stories. And then she would say, yeah, my dad, you know, he was really good friends with this person, blah, blah, blah. He was a famous actor. And they would go on a safari together, and I can remember him when I was a little kid. And then he, like, was drunk, and he fell, and he hit his head on an end table, and he died. And I can remember, based on that story alone, being at my dad's house and being afraid, like not being able to sleep after I got off the phone with my mom, that she was going to fall and hit her head on an end table and die because of alcohol, all right? So I lived in fear. That was what I lived in. Constant fear, right? And then my mom the next day would call, and she just was like, the guilt and the shame that I talked about yesterday and the embarrassment, that she felt. She wasn't sober then. I mean, she wasn't drinking anymore, but she would say, I'm so sorry. Like, she would barely remember it. And she would say, like, Mom is so sorry that, she was drunk when she talked to her. My mom never lied about it, Like, she never acted like, it wasn't a problem. We always knew it was a problem, And she would do her best. She would say things to me like, Mom's not going to drink for this month or whatever, and it would be milk at dinner and Little House on the Prairie and the whole 9 yards. I grew up in fear is what I grew up in. I don't know that from a young age I grew up in anger. My mom was not a violent drunk. My mom was not an angry drunk. I shared on here recently or on my vlog a story, one of the only stories I remember, two that I remember from my mom, is when my mom was like sitting on the front porch. We were all playing out in the street, and my mom had been drinking beer with one of her friends, and my dad pulled up with my stepmother, who was his then girlfriend, and my mom went off on him in front of all the kids in the neighborhood and everything, and she was drunk. That was the one time I remember. The other time that I remember, well, I think there was a situation between my mom and my dad at his apartment, but I just heard about that. I wasn't witness to that. The only other time, was the night that he left. I guess there was three. Was the night that he left, and they were like screaming at the top of, she was screaming at him at the top of, my dad's always very very calm. She was screaming at him at the top of the staircase, and I thought she was going to fall down the stairs. Because she was drunk, is what I thought. The other time it was a Christmas, and I thought it was a Christmas. I shared this on my vlog the other day, or maybe I shared it over here, that my mom took this like porcelain toilet seat, and she just started slamming it because she was so upset. But even then, I didn't think she was angry. I thought she was sad. I always thought my mom was sad. She wasn't, she never laid a hand on me. I can remember one time my mom was like, she didn't believe in spanking. She didn't believe in beatings. I don't know. She never talked about it growing up, if she was beat or spanked. I don't know, right? She kind of insinuated it and all this kind of stuff from her, uncle and some other people, but I don't know about that. All I know is that one time my mom said something to me. I don't even remember what I did, but she said, okay, I have to spank you now. She kept on saying it, right? It's the very same situation with the guy that hit me in the mouth. He's like, okay, I have to hit you now. My mom was like, I have to spank you, and I mean, she literally was like this. I mean, she's like, okay, there. And I mean, it's like, my mom was not a violent person. I lived in fear of my mom dying. I was constantly scared of my mom dying. I can remember asking my mom questions about who my godparents were, because I was in this divorce. No kids that when I was growing up were divorced. There just weren't. I was my parents were the only ones that were divorced when I was in elementary school. And so I can remember asking my mom who my godparents were. My godparents were my dad's brother and my Aunt Kathy were my godfather and godmother. And I can remember thinking, if my mom dies, I'm going to have to go live with one of them because I don't know where my dad is going to be. I didn't understand from a young age, It was scary for me. I was afraid. I was constantly afraid that my mom was going to die. Then when I got into high school, now, the reason why I started using, okay, and I think this is the difference between, I think when you grow up in an alcoholic home, you do one of two things. You either explosively use, okay, and abuse substances and become an alcoholic, or I think you don't use at all. And I've seen both sides of that with people, right? I think for me, what it was, and this is why I talked about the disease at the beginning, is I believe I have the disease and was born with the disease of alcoholism and addiction, okay? I think that it was something that came out of me. My dad will sit here and say to you, if you knew Peter when he was young, he had so many traits of an alcoholic long before I ever picked up. People that are in 12-step programs out there are nodding their heads, because this is something we talk about a lot in meetings, okay? Is that the personality traits of alcoholics and addicts came out long before and was exposed before the drinking ever started, okay? Well, I wasn't even in high school when I started. I was 12 when I started drinking. So when I started drinking, okay, I think that was because I had seen my mom. I had seen this. So when I would get sad, I would drink. I don't know. I kind of assimilated it somehow, right? I always wanted to be that glamorous drinker that was in a movie and just escape from everything. I always was the kid that wanted to escape from everything because I was being bullied. I was scared at home. I didn't know what was going on with my parents. It was a lot, And in all reality, my mom tried her best. I talk a lot about my mom's alcoholism, but she tried her best to be the best mother that she could, She really, really did. And that's where I believe that we are sick people trying to get well, not bad people trying to get good, okay? And that's where I feel like when people want to say it's not a disease, you're shaming people with an addiction, okay? When there's factual evidence that it is a disease out there. So then when I started to drink, I don't know that I ever even thought about it. Like, as if, I mean, I'm just talking right now, like, in my head thinking, I don't know that I ever thought, like, I hate this drinking so much, I never want to be that. At 12 years old, I don't know that I was mature enough to conceptualize that, right? But I can tell you what happened at 12 years old for me when I started drinking is that I met the drink and the drink met me. And then it just took off, okay? And when we talk in recovery and addiction about the physical craving combined with the mental obsession, I had that at 12 years old, okay? I had a physical craving once I started drinking. Once the drink hit me, and this is where I talk about the treatment options, like if you don't pick up, right? Like you're fine, okay? That once I picked up, okay, and I knew what alcohol could do for me, I started having a physical craving for it, especially the more I drank. And I was drinking alone in my room, okay, at my dad's house mostly. And so when I was hiding it from him, he had no clue. It was like they would go to bed early, I'd stay up and watch TV shows, I'd steal alcohol from my dad, things like that, right? He had no clue that I was doing it. And I was young. This happened all through middle school into high school, okay? And so I think what happened was I had the physical craving, and then I had it combined with the mental obsession. I can literally remember sitting at school on a Friday when I was going to my dad's house for the weekend, sitting there in my head thinking about, okay, how am I going to steal this? What movies am I going to watch? Blah, 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 whatever. I mean, I can remember thinking about it in my head. That's not normal for a 12-year-old, okay? Or a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old. It's not normal. Right? So where does that come from? Well, I believe I was born with addiction. To the people that are so repulsed by it, okay, because I can tell you right now, repulsion, disgust, anger at an alcoholic or an addict, I've been there before. It hasn't stopped me from being an alcoholic or an addict. I've been that repulsed and that disgusted and that angry and that resentful an alcoholic or an addict before. It has never stopped me from using, okay? So what I have to believe is there are a lot of people in families that are born that do not have the predisposition to addiction, even though they're born to one or two addicts or alcoholics. Okay, I've seen families where two have it, two don't. You know, I got it. Today, I'm grateful for it. I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic and addict today because it's taught me some of the greatest lessons in my life. Thank God I made it out. Thank God I'm on the other side today, right? But for the grace of God. But I know a lot of people that, you know, are in families where there's two, you know, like mom and dad are both alcoholics and addicts, and maybe one's in recovery, or both are in recovery, or both are still using, and two are. I know a lot of people, when you hear the stories, you know, in the rooms of recovery, you hear these stories a lot. And people will say, like, my brother and I are both in the program, but my sister has never touched an ounce of alcohol. She hates it. She can't stand it because of what she grew up with. She probably doesn't have the predisposition for addiction. That's probably the difference, you know? So the person asking the question, you probably don't have the predisposition for addiction. Thank God you don't, you know? Thank God that you didn't have to go through all that. I'm grateful for that for you, you know? And I understand your anger at having to grow up in a situation like that. I think the thing we don't talk a lot about is, and this is why it's important that there are programs out there like Adult Children of Alcoholics, ACOA, that exist, that, because even at 51, I still relate to the world somewhat, and you would think I would know better, right? But I still relate to the world as a child of an alcoholic. And let me just give you a few examples. I'm very much a people pleaser in my personal life, right? It's something I've had to really, like, work through. Because if mom was happy, then the house was happy, then mom didn't need to drink, okay? And if mom didn't drink, then mom wouldn't be sad, and then everything would be okay, and I didn't have to worry about mom. Age 5, 6. Now, think about that, okay? That at 5 or 6, that's what I was thinking about. My mom wasn't deliberately doing that, okay? I'm not making excuses for her. She chose to drink. But that's how my head worked, okay? Today, I'm a people pleaser because I still think that way. If I make this person happy, if I just go do this thing I don't want to do, blah, 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 whatever, okay? If a friend asks me to go do something, I really don't want to do it. But I don't want them yelling at me and being upset and blah, 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 whatever, so I'll just go, right? I did that for a long time. Today, I don't. I don't go to things I don't want to go to today, right? That's just one way, right? You know, other ways were, I've talked a lot about isolating in my other channels, you know, and that, like, my home is a very safe place for me and things like that, right? I did that as well, you know. I had all my stuffed animals lined up on my bed and on the floor, and I stayed in my room, and I did puppet shows and all that kind of stuff. It was safe for me, you know. I live in this constant imaginary world. Today, I love movies. I love television shows. I love books. I love to escape. I escaped a lot as a kid, okay? I escaped a lot into movies. I escaped a lot into books. I escaped into old-time radio shows like The Shadow. I was constantly escaping to something, right? You know? And so, and I think for, like, there's so many things I give you guys examples of how I still maneuver the world today. This is why programs like Alanon and ACOA are so important. Alanon is a 12-step program for friends and family members of alcoholics and addicts. And it's not about going there and learning how to fix the alcoholic or addict. It's going there and learning how to fix yourself, because we still relate to the world as friends and family of alcoholics and addicts. You know, I grew up in the home of an alcoholic. I grew up in an alcoholic home. I was part of that, you know. I've shared that, like, on Christmases when I was in high school. I can remember my mom would be passed out in bed, right? And I'm, like, cleaning out the wine glasses and the drink glasses, the gin and tonic scotch water glasses from around the house when my aunt and uncle and everybody was over there, right? My mom would be passed out upstairs, and I'm, like, cleaning out a glass, drinking a glass, cleaning out a glass, drinking a glass, you know? I can also remember pouring all my mom's alcohol out because I was so pissed at it, you know? I don't know. Like, it's such a confusing time for me. I can't make sense of it. What I can make sense of is June 2nd of 1995. June 2nd was the day that my mom got sober. It was the greatest gift other than my birth that my mother has ever given me in my entire life. And I'm so incredibly grateful for that. And I do want to say this to people out there, because I talk a lot about my mom. And I don't know that I've ever said this in a video before. But for anybody out there, because so many people have come to me in recovery and said, I wish my parent had gotten sober. Or, I'm so happy for you that your mom got to see you sober. My parents they died and they never got to see me sober, okay? So for anybody out there that didn't get to have the opportunity in the relationship that I had with my mom where we shared sobriety, or you are not an alcoholic or an addict and your parents were, or whatever the story may be, okay? I just want you to know, I'm sorry you lived through that. I'm sorry that you never got to see your parents get sober, or I'm sorry that your parents never got to see you get sober. I wish that everybody could live that experience that I got to have in my life. It literally made up for a lot of my childhood. I still talk about the stories from my childhood because there's still wounds there. There always probably will be, you know? Even my mom making, you know, amends to me way late because she thought she had, you know? Even when she did that, and even though she had changed her life, it couldn't take away from the things that I lived in fear. You know, I was telling my cousin Caroline this. We were talking about rescue dogs the other day. I was telling her about this show that I was watching about rescue dogs years ago, and they said something about, like, rescue dogs are born and live in fear until they're rescued. So imagine, like, a dog 4 to 6 to 8 years old that has lived in a cage this big and pooped in themselves and whatever and is shaking, living in fear. That's all they know is fear. Can you imagine all your life all you know is fear? Well, I don't compare myself to a rescue dog whatsoever, because I had a lot of good times and a lot of happy times. But I lived in a lot of fear. I lived in a lot of uncertainty. I never knew what mom I was walking into when I came home from school. I could have Little House on the Prairie, made raw apple muffins and chili dinner, and we were going to sit at the table and have a good talk and watch a movie later. Or I could have mom sitting with her headphones on, bawling her eyes out, listening to Judy Collins and Bob Dylan. True story. I never knew what I was walking into, and it was scary as hell for me. You know? I don't know that I'll ever go away from that. That's why I don't today love to, it's probably a huge part of my social anxiety, you know, where I don't like to walk into situations because I don't know what I'm going to find. You know what I'm saying? But I'm working on it. I'm getting over it. We all can. We can all do the work to get through it. I think this is a fantastic question. I do, you know? I wish I had a better answer for you on why I thought it was okay to pick up. The only answer I can find is that I believe that I have a predisposition for addiction. And when I was introduced to it, it was the magic cure. That's the only thing I can say, because I hated alcohol. I hated it, you know? I hated it. And yet here I am, 29 years sober. And I'm here 29 years sober because I loved alcohol. That's the truth. I loved alcohol. I was in love with alcohol. Alcohol was my best friend. Drugs were my best friend. They worked for a very long time for me. Until they didn't, you know? So anyway, thank you so much for asking that question. It was a great question. I love you guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.